Dan Tochinni.
Hey, how are you?
Welcome to the Messy Shirt.
It's my life.
I know it is. So, yeah, I wanted to start this podcast kind of as an extension to my book, The Messy Truth, and really diving in with people that I love and trust and admire to talk about the messiness of our lives. And before I get into what you do for a living, and I mean, you have so many great stories, and obviously I've had the honor and pleasure of hearing so many of your stories.
Honor or pleasure, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, you've been through some shit.
Yeah.
And that's, really what I want to get into. But I want to set up, for everybody listening, who you are.
Okay.
In my life. That, I met you through my now second ex-husband, which is like a fucking mouthful. Like, I don't know how to say.
Number two.
Number two. And you actually married us.
Yep, performed the wedding.
Yes. Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah. I always like to get that clear because somebody said, you married her? No.
Right. No, although you are my ex-husband's business partner, I felt really lucky that, you and I had, remained friends through it all, because not getting choked up, it's really something in my throat. Because it was an impossibly hard time for all of us, I think, in that, and you were really gracious with your love and friendship during that time. So, anyways, so for people who are listening and know that there's a lot of history here with Dan and I and our families, and you know and love my boys, and I know and love your family and your amazing wife, Eileen. I'd love for you, in your own words, to talk about kind of what you're doing now, and then we can kind of get into how you got into all of that.
I'm a transformationalist. I bring, I'm called when people are trying to get something done. They made a number of efforts and haven't been able to get it done. And I work with human performance, basically. What it means to bring something into being. And, predominantly I work with the way people show up, with how they presence themselves, how they listen. Starts with listening. And then if you get this listening straight, you speak powerfully.
Yeah.
And so I've done a lot of work with corporate turnarounds and culture blending and, conflict resolution, that kind of stuff. Like when shit hits the fan, that's right. And I like it. I enjoy doing that because I think I grew up in a very conflicted environment, and I learned how to order it and order myself mostly.
I talk a lot about my son, Grant, who went through a possibly hard time, went through rehab. And I met you and Adrian when I was really in the thick of that.
Yeah.
And, just hearing you talk about transformation, you guys were so the catalyst for me to change the way I parented my kid, because my son was in a lot of trouble. He was, going off the rails, in rehab, and I didn't know how to reach him, and I'll never forget being at, I guess it was I don't know if it was the Revenant or the Coaches Academy. At that point, I just showed up to anything Adrian told me to show up to. But I remember that being so pinnacle for me, because I remember one of the things I remember is you guys taught me to be really curious.
Get to know where he's what.
Yeah, versus pushing my own agenda on you. How did you bring him out?
So I just stopped him and challenged his presumptions. And he was, and it was kind of edgy. It was edgy. I was edgy because, he just presumes with things that weren't so. And I'm asked. And he was so sweet and so humble about it. And I knew we were going to connect then. Because I just said, something like, how do you know that? How do you even know that? Well, you just made an assumption and you're trying to fit me in a box, something like that.
Assumption he was making about you.
About me and about what I was up to.
Yeah. You don't know what you're talking about, old man?
Yeah, kind of. You're just right, And I was just doing a lot of listening. I wondered what he was thinking, but I wanted to get to know him before I just assumed I knew who was over there. Yeah. And we really connected on that call. And from that time on, if there's a lot of shorthand, we could just get right to it. And he's a beautiful boy.
Yeah. I'll never forget going and visiting him after I spent some time working with you and him saying like, "You're so different, Mom," and I was like, well, because I was trying to all the things that I'd been doing were not working, and so much of what I recall about that time was my willingness to just hear him and just listen and ask him questions. And it was such an interesting shift. One of the things that I've learned in my career is that in the beginning of like Dry Bar, like I felt like I had to have all the answers. I had to know everything. Everybody was looking at me for everything.
For direction and everything.
So if I don't know, I'm going to damn sure pretend I know, fake it. I used to say that like publicly, like fake it till you make it. Like, and then I think it was such an interesting time for me of learning like to talk to my son, to ask him questions, to get to know him. And then I think that like bled over into my business life of like, oh, I don't have to know everything, and I can sit across from somebody who works for me or with me and say like, I don't actually know. And like, holy shit, what a revelation, because I always felt like I had to know everything. And then I think that's probably around the time I learned what vulnerability means.
Well,
I feel like I went through my whole life without knowing that word,
Well, good timing.
I mean,
especially the two boys.
I think it was actually when I met Brene Brown that I, and got turned on to her, that I, was like, oh my God, like I never even thought about that. And my whole life, like in a fucking cloud, not knowing vulnerability. And it took so much vulnerability to connect with my son.
Yeah.
It meant like, you don't get to be in control anymore. And I'll never forget one of the things that you did with Grant early on that made me so angry. Like he was dating this girl that was bad news. And I beyond not approving, like I was nervous. This girl was dangerous and we all knew it except for Grant. And he was going to go on a trip with her that I really didn't want him to go. And I'll never forget him coming over and telling me, he's like, I should have called with Dan, and Dan thinks I should go. And I was like, I'm going to fucking kill Dan. What? And I remember, you probably remember this, I remember calling you and being like, what the fuck, Dan? Why would you do that? And what did you say to me? Do you remember?
I don't. I think I said something like,
relax.
Relax. It's better for him to discover what's dangerous and not, and he's got a head on his shoulders. Something I went through with my daughter when she was 18. She wanted to go to the East Coast and live for 2 weeks with the guy she was in love with. Thought she wanted to marry. He's on a military base. And it reminded me a lot of that. And he had the very same vibe, like he's going to do it anyway, or he's going to figure a way to do it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, okay, let's say, my wife is really mad at me too. She did the same thing you did. She goes, are you crazy? You're part of the problem. I go, no, you don't understand. She's 18. He wasn't 18. But she's 18, my daughter was, and she's going to do what she's going to do. She goes, oh, they're probably going to have sex. And I said, probably too late. I think it's already happened. But my point was, I want to be in her head when she goes. So if I'm fighting her instead of standing with her,
yeah.
And I just said, and then I shared similar attitude with Grant as to come to you and say, look, man, you got to make your decision. And you're going to make that decision anyway. And I was hoping that you wouldn't, because if you press him, he'll just polarize rather than think and have you in his head when he's thinking.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing with my daughter. I said, well, you get out there, you just look around and see what you think. It's, I want you to look there on the base when you're in the barracks, you're with this guy. I want you to think, is this the life I want? How will it be living with this gentleman and his friends and the whole deal? Yeah. Because you're going to marry what you get. You're not going to marry what you think you're going to make him be. Right? We had that conversation. And so that was we talked a bit about that. And I said, Grant needs to find out just how dangerous this gal is in your work. Like, what does that mean?
I'm such a control freak, and it'll be a lifelong lesson for me for sure. Of learning how to let go.
A lot of times when we think we ought to go one way, we might just want to consider the opposite way and really consider it. Be curious about what would happen if we went this way. So like with Grant or with my daughter at the time, that opened the door for them to feel supported by you. At the same, then with that support, you could put your cautions in. Like, look, I trust you. I want you to think about what you're doing. That's how I worked with Grant.
Yeah.
Like, like, what's your real purpose with this gal? And that really got him, because he couldn't name his purpose except that he liked being with her. And I said, well, what happens when the feeling goes away? Like, what are you really doing there? And he was so conscientious about it. He was way ahead of me. He thought himself into what was next. I'll never forget one call we got on just after all that. And he said, I don't think this is going to work out. I said, well, really, tell me more. Right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean,
it's almost like reverse psychology.
Well, it's just like get out and think through it, right? Because if I'm resisting him, he's just going to back up into his predetermined thinking. Yeah. But if I'm curious about what he actually cares about, and he can't even name why he's with her, well, that void in itself is going to get him to think. There's a dynamic called the Zargonic effect. I've talked about it before with you. But there's the woman neuroscientist, Ria Zargonic, found that she tested the brain, put the cephalogram, whatever they call it, on there, and read stories to people. And when she read the Gospels to people, she noticed that the brain activity went on for 24 hours afterwards. And that's because the stories don't have an ending. They leave you to think in a question. And that's what I would try to do, is like ask a question that would cause him to really think about things, not just find an answer, but like think about what he really wanted. And that made a big difference for him. And for me, it opened up a whole plethora of conversation that I hadn't anticipated, and I don't think he did either, but was really brought us together.
So do you think, when you think about like business leaders that you're coaching,
same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing, because, business leaders, like you said, a lot of times come in thinking they have to have all the answers. I can be confident, I can be certain that things are going to turn out without knowing how they're going to turn out. So I'm not saying don't be confident, but I'm going to be confident that I can find what it's going to take, because I'm committed to it no matter what. I'm in. So if I'm in, I don't have to know all the answers. I need to be the presence that's going to drive it forward. And I'm going to call on wherever the best answers come up, because my mind's going to be on what it is I'm actually committed to have happen. And for me, with Grant, for instance, or with a team, it doesn't matter. If I get really clear about what I'm committed to have with the team, like let's say we're going to launch a program or something, launch a project. Well, I want to the way I want them to be, I'm going to be with them.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to think that out. And I'm going to start presencing that early. And I'm going to invite them into it.
If you're coaching me, I'm going to say, like, I can't say I don't actually, like, enjoy my job because, my boss is such an asshole all the time. What do you do with that?
I say, well, there's a couple things. How long have you been complaining about this? And if you've been complaining about it for a while, I'm going to ask you, well, there must be something you like about your job, because you continue to do it, even though you complain about it. So I'd want to get clear about that.
Yeah.
Like, what are you getting out of working for somebody you have judged as an asshole?
Yeah.
And are they really that? And if they weren't, would you want to know? And, well, they are. I've got evidence. And, well, then good. Let's talk about you, the prostitute. You who are prostituting yourself for this job. Let's talk about that, right?
I feel like that always gets people pretty fired up.
Yeah, I don't want to get them all edgy, but
what do you mean by that? Like,
well, you're trading your integrity for short-term gain. You're trading your inheritance for a bowl of soup. You're willing to put up with what you say is abusive so you can get by today. You can have your hamburger today. But, long-term, you've got grief. And you're making that choice. And of course, there's all kinds of stories behind it. Well, if I didn't do that, I couldn't pay the rent. I couldn't send my kid to school, et cetera, et cetera. Well, really? Is that true? Or you just don't want to do what it would take to do those things, to make sure those things happen. You don't want to risk what it's going to take to do that. It's going to call on a part of you that hasn't come alive yet. And you don't want to deal with it because you want to stay in the familiar. And part of the familiar is this complaint. So if you want that, no problem, no judgment.
Yeah.
But don't tell yourself you want something different.
So comfortable in the familiar.
Yes.
I mean, I think we're afraid.
It is.
To go beyond what we know.
It has to get bad enough for me to want to change. I mean, I've blown up a company before, my own company, after 20 years. And it was very prosperous and did well for 20 years. And then I decided I didn't want to do what it was requiring of me any longer. And I, in that way, I found all kinds of ways I feel to lie to myself and others I worked with without even thinking about it. And it created animosity, and eventually the team scattered.
Yeah.
And so I journal everything. So going back through my journals was easy to track just where I lied to myself.
The unwillingness I was to have the conversation that needed to have with Adrian to
get it clear.
Yeah. It was like, and I haven't really talked about this super publicly yet, but we were misaligned. And it's interesting the story you were telling about your daughter, because we were so misaligned on lifestyle. You have little kids.
You don't, your children are older.
Yeah, I had sold my business. He's in the throes of growing his business. And we were so distracted with, love and lust and obsession and all that. We were unwilling to have that tough conversation.
Yeah, I broached it a few times with you guys.
Yeah.
And he thought, he had handled it. I said, you guys better make sure this is handled, because what we were talking about, just some of the situations between you guys and the different lifestyles.
Yeah.
I could see the tensions, and in a way, it feels like people are raining on your parade.
Right.
And I saw that. And I would say if you get courageous at home, you're going to be far more courageous at work. Because at home, there's a lot more at stake than there is at work, in my experience. Mm-hmm. If I'm married to you, you can look at me sideways and hurt me, because you know my weaknesses, and you can leverage me, and you could say things that are going to get under the armor.
Yeah.
Whereas at work, I can be much more guarded.
Yeah.
So if I want to have those conversations here, I'm going to be far more finesseful at home.
Yeah.
Having at work, when I sit down with somebody to have a difficult conversation, there's ways to do that, and ways to prepare for that.
Yeah.
And I know. Getting people to prepare for conversations isn't easy. They have to slam their fingers in the doors a few times, because for me, I'll spend if I'm going to have a conversation, sometimes I'll spend an hour or so getting ready for it. If it's a hard conversation, potentially, destructive in a bad way, there's a lot at stake. I'm going to take my time and think about what I want to accomplish there, who I'm committed to being there. What is it I really want to talk about? How do I want to frame it? What examples can I give people so they can see it? What do I feel? What do I experience when it comes up? When I'm fired up, and when I have a client who's fired up, I want them to tell me what they're fired up about. I want them to tell themselves. I know when I'm fired up, I write it down, and I ask myself, what am I so angry about? Why have I lost my cool on this? Because that's how I've cost myself a lot by blowing up and not preparing.
Same.
Right. Well, we know, right? I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah. Because you get so taken away with your emotion, and that for me, it's I recently figured out that I'm a Pisces, or I've always said I'm a Pisces. My birthday is March 20th, but someone was recently no, you're a cusper. You're a Pisces and Aries.
I'm a cusp too.
What's your birthday?
It's December 23rd.
So you're what?
I'm Sagittarius. I'm Capricorn on the cusp of Sagittarius.
Gotcha.
Right.
I don't know enough about
signs.
I just know mine, and I know that Aries is fire. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, my whole life I don't realize how much I am. I have so much fire in my belly.
If you think about it, that's what makes you successful. But at the same time, it's also what undermines your success. It can, if you don't get a hold of it. That's why I know for me, I have sabotaged myself multiple times. I mean, I remember I had a guy that I was in business with, and we had this board, and we were two companies, and one of the partners didn't want this guy on the board and kept trying to get me to move him off the board. And I told him, no, this guy who's been part of this process, I don't want to get him. I think he's good on the board.
Yeah.
Long story short, the guy I was talking to went to this guy and told this guy I wanted him off the board. And this gentleman got really upset because he felt like I was being two-faced with him, which I wasn't.
Yeah.
And he took me to his house. My wife and I invited us over, beautiful home, sat us down, and then spent an hour just reading me the riot act about how two-faced I was, how I betrayed him. And my wife was with me. She knew the story. And I didn't say anything. She goes, why didn't you say anything? I said, one, he wouldn't have believed it. Two, I probably would have got upset and done something stupid because before this, I'd already wrecked something in my life. So I knew not to go off.
Yeah.
And I thought it was not going to make a difference because he wasn't interested. He never asked me any questions. He just wanted to tell me what was going on for him.
Yeah.
She goes, well, are you upset? I said, not really. I was trying to see how he could see that, and I was starting to understand how he could see and believe what this other guy told him. I can see how I actually sewed into it by some of the things I did or didn't do that this guy was able to use, and I can see why he would believe it. And it taught me a lot about not having to make a defense sometimes. There's sometimes when it's better just to be falsely accused and listen if all it's going to do is make somebody else wrong. And I figure one day maybe he'll want to know. But if he doesn't, it's okay. I mean, he got that off his chest, and I got to hear what he really thought about the situation, given what he had heard.
Man, I don't know if I could do that. I mean, that's so interesting.
To me, it was a breakthrough for me because I'm a warrior at heart, and I wanted to go to war there. And I thought, no, this guy needs to say this.
Yeah.
And I need to hear it. I need to hear whatever is going on. There's something I did in here that helped contribute to this. And I started to see little things that I didn't intervene in because I wanted to be nice. And there was a number of different things I just checked off the box.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about being a warrior. It's like
You're a warrior.
I know. But in this, I feel like in this iteration of my life, which feels very untethering, like I feel such a sense of, kind of aloneness, and like, I'm, single mom, and, and just my propensity to always want to fight it to the ground, whatever it is.
Creative people are insecure. We tend to be insecure about certain things, and those insecurities is what makes us creative because we're trying to compensate, and that causes some creativity. That's also could sabotage it because in my insecurity, I'm not paying attention to what's wanted and needed, and I could be out of the insecurity driving the very thing that I'm looking for away because it looks like a threat, but it's actually an opportunity. I've done it, so I'm not pointing any fingers, believe me.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's so true. I feel like I'm at an interesting stage in my life where I was like, why did I do that? Like, why do I self-sabotage,
But the question may be too big. It's probably better to zero in on what it was that you sabotaged and then look at the very particulars in there. And because it's that's a big question. Why do I sabotage? Yeah, probably to stay alive. I mean, I think the answer is.
Well, and as I get more space from the things that I've sabotaged in my life, I'm like,
could look at it.
Oh, I think I wasn't supposed to be doing that thing, Or
you weren't supposed to be doing it that way.
Yeah.
Well, you never know. There's a tension. I like to feel, at least for me, I want to feel the hole that is left. When I fail at something, if it can wound me deep enough, it'll produce possibility. It'll produce vision. And
But what does that mean? I feel like a lot of people say that.
Well, I'll just give you my relationship with my wife. I had lied to her in the first 10 years of our relationship, 5 years we dated, 5 years married. I had lied to what I did for a living. I was a drug dealer, and I had a movie theater, I opened some movie theaters, and I would launder money through the theaters, and it would be legal again. I did stuff like that, and cash businesses. And I lied about that. I was a womanizer. I lied about that. And I realized at one point in the relationship that I was lonely, not alone. I was lonely because she didn't know who was here, and she kept trying to reach for who was here, but I knew if I told her who was here, it would disappoint her, and maybe she'd leave, and I didn't want to lose her. So pretty selfish, pretty narcissistic. And at some point I realized, well, you know what, if I ever want to have her, I got to put everything on in the light the way it is, not the way I'd like it to be.
Right.
And so when I started to confess the things, I'll never forget the first time I sat down and started confessing all of it, just telling her. She started asking questions. You know, Eileen, she's very detailed.
Yeah.
And she was into all the details. Then I got angry at her. And I stood up to walk out, and she said, so you're using me again? Which stopped me dead in my tracks, because it hit home. And yeah, I realized, yes, I was. I realized that I feel shame as contempt. I don't usually feel shame. I feel contempt, searing anger. Because if you expose me, then I want to burn you to get away from the way I look. And that's what I was doing with her. I was making it about her. I was getting angry and contemptuous towards her, and I was going to storm out. Because I couldn't stand the way I looked in her eyes, the way she was asking those questions. Right. And when I surrendered to be wounded by that, by the way I didn't want to see myself, literally cleared me up. Yeah. I mean, even if she didn't stay with me, I knew I was a different person. I sat and listened and answered every one of her questions unequivocally. I didn't try to preserve myself. And I knew that at the end of this, she was either going to leave, or maybe she would forgive me, and if she did, she'd probably leave anyway, not want to be with me. And to my surprise, she forgave me, but she didn't know if she wanted to stay with me, and we stayed together for about a year. You know, we were going to live in this house together in separate rooms, and no physical contact, because we have a little boy, Danny. He's now 40. And we come together and talk during that time, and we came back together. It was a pretty dramatic thing, but we talked a lot. But I realized now, at that point, I was free, and I could then show her who was really over here, and, you know, how afraid I was. I didn't realize how afraid I was till I listened to her and answered her questions. I realized every time I answered the question how afraid I was to be who I really was, because I didn't like who I was at that moment, and I was afraid that was going to destroy me. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's so true. It's like we don't want to let people in to see who we really are.
But then we know they may not, if they know what I know, they're probably not going to stick around.
Yeah.
And I struggle with, for a long time with being a fraud. It's still there. And I find when I get myself in trouble, it's I'm trying to cover up. I want you to think something other than me, than who I am at the moment or what's going on for me at the moment.
Yeah.
And so that I've learned, rather than try to get rid of that, to listen to it like it's like an ally. Like it's telling me, when I start to get insecure and I find myself lying or exaggerating, I know there's something I need to be honest about or vulnerable about, with myself at least, and maybe with you.
Yeah. In the early dry bar days when I was, I would go into shops and I was a maniac, and I would get really mad at people. And I was like, it just wasn't as perfect as I wanted it.
You did the Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Early Steve Jobs.
Yeah. No. And I remember as my brother who finally said to me, everyone's scared of you. And I was like, what? It's because when I go in the stores, I'm mad about this or that, and I'm letting it show. And I'm like, I have no regard for how it's making anybody else feel. And, it was like, I realized, and now I did not realize it at the time, but now I realize, like, oh, there's a breakdown. There's a big breakdown here of like how I want things to be and how things are. And so I'm going to burn it down when I go in there.
What are you thinking of getting out of that?
Probably power, probably control.
A sense of power and control.
A sense of power and control, was like, this is not the fucking way I want it. Something that like Adrian used to always say to me, like, which I'd never heard before, was like, I'd walk in a room and throw a grenade and I'd leave. And I always kind of love that analogy, because like it's blowing shit up, and I wonder, like, as you're sitting here talking, I'm thinking like, man,
and that's what you did in the air industry. You disrupted it, right? So
it's like a blessing and a curse.
That's right. It depends on if you're using it or it's using you. That's how I look at it. Like, who's in charge right now? Who will I put in charge?
Because I would tell myself that I'm just really passionate and I really care about this, obviously more than anybody else does. And damn it, I'm going to make it right and better.
There you go. I think you said something key there. The comparison between you and everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? That comparison, I found that to be the mischievous thing in my language. And then when I work with teams, when I hear teams comparing themselves with each other, I know there's a lot of stuff going underground nobody wants to talk about.
Like?
Well, look, if I'm comparing myself with you, I'm in competition with you. And if I'm in competition with you, I don't want you to see where I'm failing or where I'm weak. And so I'm going to guard that instead of open it, which if we're on a team, we're going to make it work. To open that aspect of what's going on for me, invite you in or somebody in to contribute where they're strong and I'm not.
Then it comes back to vulnerability. And this was also a lesson that I really had to learn, is that, again, back to what I was saying before, it's like I don't have all the answers.
God played a lot of sports, and so we competed, but we competed in a healthy way. Like if I was struggling, somebody might be better at what I'm trying to get good at will come over and support me and show me things I didn't see, right? That's a different type of competition. Though we're competing with each other, we're rooting for each other at the same time. So I'm not, again, both sides of it, but it's when competition is used like a political tool or it's used to one-up, you've got, those issues are really profound.
I feel like businesses should be run like that.
Well, like team all the way.
Yeah. Where there used to be such a hierarchy of like, oh, you're the CEO or the president of this company, so you make all the decisions, you have all the private conversations. Whereas like, I just don't believe in that.
You're going to have a hierarchy, but you're going to relate to it. So think about the minute you aim at something, you create a hierarchy because the aim produces certain things are more important than others. And while I know plenty of really good CEOs who know when to follow as well as when to lead, right?
Right.
And I think that's really, if you're aligned with something, you and I are aligned with something, and we're committed to that because we both see that accomplishing that is good for us individually and collectively. We really get it. We get it at a visceral level. That when you come with something that's better than what I thought of, I'm going to welcome it because it ultimately is going to bring about the well-being. Like with Dry Bar, I'm sure you had multiple situations where you had to face your own ego and go, nope, I'm not going to do that. You told me about a couple of things, right? Where you were willing to back off and it enabled that company to scale and do all that you've done.
Getting out of my own way.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's because I would assert you were clear about something bigger than just what you wanted it for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, there was so much ego. It was like, I remember when, we were starting to really grow as a company and, like every email would come from Alli Webb. And then, we started to make everything come from Dry Bar. And I was like, what?
Who am I?
What about me? Or it's like, people love that it comes from me. And, and I don't know what, and ultimately we made the decision as we were building a brand that this brand was going to stand on its own, and it wasn't about like Alli Webb.
Yeah.
It was the Alli Webb show, which was like an ego thing for me of like, this is my baby, this is my idea. I wanted to be all about me, and learning the hard way that like, what's the greater good here?
You had some good people around you too, obviously.
Yeah.
And others that were probably in your ear about that. Yeah. I wasn't there at that time.
Yes. You would have been helpful to me at that time because I was so stuck in all of this kind of ego work because I was like, I'm supposed to be the boss. I'm supposed to know everything. I want this. This is my brand. This is my baby, and I think it's such a good lesson for, leaders and entrepreneurs to recognize, the importance and like how much can open up if you're willing to, listen to people around you and be the kind of leader that's open to, feedback, which if it sucks, and for me, I was getting that feedback because it was my brother who was like, you're being a jerk and nobody likes you.
Like,
you better change it.
You don't know.
Yeah. I'm like, everybody loves me. What are you talking about? Which really they didn't. And there was I remember when he said that to me at that moment thinking like, I'm going to fuck up the culture here, and let that be a lesson to anyone who was listening who's in a leadership role that like, if you're being really difficult to work with, and your ego is all tied up in it like it was with me, like you will not create the culture that you want.
Yeah, there's a tension there. I worked with some really creative people like you, and there is a tension there because you have something, or you see something about the brand nobody else may see.
100%.
How do you communicate that and still be open to the contributions that are going to help forward that?
Yeah.
And that takes some real quiet. You got to listen. You got to notice. I don't know. You're very detailed, and so you notice a lot that's going on. I've been with you multiple times.
Yeah.
And you pick up on things that are going to detract from the experience or whatever you're doing. And that's vital, right? And knowing when to stand on that, and knowing when it's just your, as you say, your ego or your need to validate yourself. That's something that really is valuable to entrepreneurs. I mean, if you could break, because you've done it, you've actually walked through it. And there's a whole internal, I just think, it's, for me, entrepreneurship, leadership is a way of being in the world. It's not something you do.
Yeah.
You do the things you do because of the way you're in the world. And I also see that as, same with being a father or a mother, or, there's ways of being in the world that bring forth the essence of those things. And I know it sounds woo-woo, but getting a hold of those ways of being is, and for you to get to where you are, you've mastered that at a certain level. And then I watched it with your kids. I watched the shift with the kids and getting a hold of your own demons in a way that they became your allies. It's tremendous to watch. I mean, in anybody, right? Yeah,
I mean, it's such an evolution. I know for me, and it's an ongoing process that you don't ever get to stop. Unfortunately,
never. There's no arrival.
There's no stopping. This work goes on and on. But even last week, my Kit was saying to me, like, he was like, he just out of like the blue was like, I love you so much, Mom, and I'm so proud of you, and and it's like
so good.
It was such a like, he kind of was like going on and on. He was being so sweet about like how much he loves our relationship and how and I was like, this was like, it was a payoff for like all the work of like, letting him be who he is, and again, and I know we made this parallel a couple times. It's like that human that I became because the stakes were so fucking high was because my children and the relationship for a lifetime. It led over into, I just want to show up like this for everybody in my life.
If you care about your team, you're going to be bothered just like you are about your kids. At least I am.
Yeah.
You're going
to. Man, there's so much good stuff here. I know we probably have to wrap it up, but one of the questions that I wrote out that I just would love to get your perspective and maybe something that I will ask everybody that comes on is, what's your best advice for a happy life?
Learn to suffer. Like, if you're not happy, count it a blessing. Look, happiness is when those times come and go because the circumstances line up with what you think they should be, and you're going to feel happy. But it's in the suffering that we meet each other. I mean, when Eon died and I saw you, and Adrian, you guys came, you have no idea how much that meant to us, and to me personally. And while those times are the worst times in the world, very good times. And,
love.
I guess part of this is saying, keep an eye on your lies. Because fear is just the result of every lie. And if I care about somebody, then there's the chance of losing them. There's a chance of losing their affection, their approval, their partnership, their fellowship, their support. But that fear is just part of the lie. And the lie is, I can't get along without them. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting when you say lie. I'm like, what am I lying? I'm not lying about anything.
Yeah. But
shit I have.
Yeah, like, there are little things I tell myself that make me worried about what could happen. Instead of knowing that whatever happens, there's plenty of resource in it. Because the minute it isn't the way I think it should be, and what the way it should be is the lie, I try to get away from what it is, and what it is where all the resource is.
So good.
So that's what I would, it's like,
It's almost like embrace the suffering.
just embrace it, let it walk. We call it hug the cactus, right? I mean, I can't tell you the beauty that's come out of the, what we went through.
Darkness.
Losing Leon. And just we'd walked through some really tough stuff the last few years. And to see the beauty in my family that's come out of that, it's nothing I could do. It's the hand of God. I really believe it. We'll watch it happen. And to be part of it is beautiful. And so I don't want to get in the way of it.
Yeah.
So I'm always checking myself about what I'm making up about the way it should be, and how can I connect with the way that it is, and who am I committed to being in the way that it is?
Yeah. Beautiful.
So, thanks for having me. I love you.
Love you too.